Hello everyone, and welcome back to Altrole's Class Breakdown series. I'm Bill, admin and instructor for Altrole, and today we're going to continue our series to give a general overview of all the classes in D&D 5th edition, to help you learn about which ones you may want to try in your next D&D game. Today, we're going to dive into the Monk class, a versatile melee extraordinaire that excels at moving through and controlling the battlefield. Now, in D&D, monks are based off their real-life counterparts and tend to come from remote monasteries and cloisters, seeking personal perfection through reflection and martial training. As part of this training, monks tap into a magical energy that flows through all living beings known as Ki. Tapping into Ki grants the monks uncanny speed and strength in combat, as well as the ability to disrupt the Ki within creatures that they're fighting. When it comes to their role in the party, the monk is a master of single target damage, using limited Ki resources to unleash stronger melee attacks, stunning strikes, and quick movement abilities to flow through the battlefield and take out backline targets such as archers or mages. With moderate damage and great mobility comes drawbacks, however, as the monk is too fragile to be a traditional frontline combatant. With only a d8 as their hit die and wearing no armor or shields to maintain mobility on the battlefield, if a monk gets focused down by enemy monsters, they will quickly perish. With these things in mind, the monk remains versatile within the party, but should mostly be used as a melee damage dealer to focus down weaker enemies first, while another party member tanks aggression from the larger and more dangerous enemies. To summarize the monk, I'd like to next go through a pros and cons list to best showcase what the monk is good and bad at in terms of party dynamics. I'll go ahead and start with the pros, the first of which being that the monk has very good melee damage. While not the heaviest hitter when it comes to melee attackers, the monk can put out good, consistent damage to focus down squishier targets in the backline of enemy formations. The second main pro of the monk is that they have great mobility. Through harnessing Ki, the monk has a lot of abilities that allow them to move around terrain quicker and with greater ease than other classes, giving them the freedom to go where they choose to on their turn. Finally, the last main pro is that the monk has a lot of good control options. Using Ki, the monk can either make themselves very hard to hit, causing enemies to waste attack actions trying to down them, or stun enemies entirely, setting them up to take damage from the rest of the party. Now, as I said before, with the 3 pros, there are also 3 cons. The first of which is that the monk is a very fragile class. Compared to the other melee classes, the monk does not have as large a health pool and only has a moderate armor class, relying more on special abilities to dodge incoming damage. As a result, when attacks do land, the monk feels it way more than the other martial classes. The second main con of the monk class is that they're a really bad healing option for the party. Unless you take a specific subclass, which we're going to discuss later, the monk has absolutely no healing options for the party. In fact, they would be better off using their Ki to kill enemies before they can damage allies, but can work as a backup healer in a pinch if that healing subclass is taken. Now lastly, the biggest drawback of the monk class, in my opinion, is that as a class, they are very multiple ability dependent. For reasons we'll discuss in later sections, a good monk character relies on having a high dexterity, wisdom, and constitution modifier in order to boost their damage, armor class, ability uses, and health pool. This means with standard array or with a really bad roll for ability scores, the monk will need more ability score increases before becoming the optimal version of themselves. With the overview established and the pros and cons laid out, let's dive into the unique abilities that monks get as they level up. Starting at level 1, the monk gets Unarmored Defense and the Martial Arts ability. A monk's Unarmored Defense states that when not wearing armor or shields, the monk's armor class equals 10 plus their dexterity modifier plus their wisdom modifier. Note that this differs from the Barbarian's version of unarmored defense since it doesn't allow shields and uses the wisdom modifier instead of the constitution modifier. The martial arts ability is really what gives the monk the edge they need in melee combat, as it buffs their attacks with unarmed strikes and monk weapons, which are just short swords and any melee weapons that don't have the two-handed or heavy weapon properties. When not wearing armor or shields, and while using unarmed strikes or monk weapons, the monk can use dexterity instead of strength for their attacks and damage rolls, can roll a martial arts die in the place of their unarmed strike or monk weapons, which starts at a d4 and increases as they level up, and can make a bonus action unarmed strike anytime they make the attack action with an unarmed strike or monk weapon. At level 2, the monk unlocks unarmored movement and ki. Unarmored movement increases the monk's movement speed by 10 feet whenever they're not wearing armor or shields, and gets stronger at later levels. Ki, however, is the monk's main ability, granting them access to their spiritual ki to harness unique combat abilities utilizing ki points. The monk starts with 2 ki points and gains an additional ki point every additional level, meaning a level 20 monk will have 20 ki points. When gaining this ability, there are 3 key features to use. Flurry of Blows, which lets the monk spend a ki point after an attack action to make 2 bonus action unarmed strikes. Patient Defense, which lets the monk spend a ki point to take the dodge action as a bonus action on that turn. And Step of the Wind, which lets the monk spend a ki point to disengage or dash as a bonus action on their turn. Their jump distance is also doubled for that turn. Ki points are regained upon a short or long rest, which requires the monk to meditate for at least 30 minutes during the rest. The monk can learn more ki features as they level up, and if a ki feature requires a saving throw, the save difficulty class is 8 plus their proficiency bonus plus their wisdom modifier. At level 3, the monk commits to a monastic tradition, aka a subclass, as well as gaining the Deflect Missiles ability. Now, subclasses will be discussed in their own section later. Deflect Missiles, however, lets the monk reduce the damage from ranged attacks by 1d10 plus their dexterity modifier plus their monk level. If the monk reduces all the damage from the ranged attack, and the projectile is small enough to be caught with one hand, the monk catches it, and can use a ki point to throw that projectile as part of the initial reaction to grab it. The projectile attack is made with proficiency, and counts as a monk weapon with an optimal range of 20 feet and a maximum range of 60 feet. At level 4, the monk gains their first ability score improvement and the Slow Fall ability. Ability score improvements add +2 to 1 ability score or +1 to 2 ability scores, up to the soft cap of 20. Monks gain 5 ability score increases as they level up, and if the DM is using the optional feats rule, you can forego an ability score improvement to take a feat instead. The Slow Fall ability, on the other hand, allows the monk as a reaction to reduce fall damage by 5 times their monk level. At level 5, the monk gains the Extra Attack and Stunning Strike abilities. Extra Attack allows the monk to attack twice anytime they take the attack action on their turn. Stunning Strike lets the monk spend a ki point after hitting an enemy with a melee weapon attack to force a Constitution saving throw on the enemy. If the enemy fails, they are stunned until the end of the monk's next turn. At level 6, the monk unlocks the Ki Empowered Strikes ability, and their unarmored movement increases to 15 feet. Ki Empowered Strikes makes the monk's unarmed attacks magical for the purpose of overcoming enemy resistances. At level 7, the monk unlocks the Evasion and Stillness of Mind abilities. When the monk has to make a dexterity saving throw to take half damage from a spell or effect, Evasion lets them completely ignore the damage if they succeed on the save, and only take half damage if they fail. Stillness of Mind lets the monk dispel a charm or frighten effect on themselves as an action. At level 9, the monk's unarmored movement improves again to allow them to move along vertical surfaces and across liquids as part of their movement. At level 10, the monk gains the Purity of Body ability, granting immunity to disease and poison, and has their unarmored movement bonus increased to 20 feet. Level 13 grants the monk the Tongue of the Sun and Moon ability, which grants them understanding of all spoken languages. Furthermore, any creature that can speak a language can understand what the monk says. At level 14, the monk gains the Diamond Soul ability, and their unarmored movement increases to 25 feet. Diamond Soul grants the monk proficiency in all saving throws, and allows them to spend a key point to re-roll a saving throw they have failed, so long as they take the second result. Level 15 grants the Timeless Body ability, which states the monk does not suffer the frailty of old age, cannot be aged magically, and no longer needs food or water to survive. The monk can still die of old age, however. At level 18, the monk gains the Empty Body ability, and their unarmored movement increases to 30 feet. Empty Body allows the monk to spend 4 key points to turn invisible, making them resist all types of damage except force damage. The monk can additionally spend 8 key points to cast the Astral Projection spell with no material costs, although they cannot take other creatures with them. And finally, at level 20, the monk unlocks the Perfect Self ability, which states when the monk rolls initiative and has no key points remaining, they regain 4 key points. With all these abilities in mind, you can see that the monk gains a lot of incremental buffs as they level up, consistently getting more mobility, control abilities, and passive buffs to make them run faster, strike harder, and avoid damage from enemies. There's less a sharp power spike for monks and just a gradual increase in strength with every new level. Now that we've established the monk's base abilities, let's take a look at the various monastic traditions they have, which represent the monk's specialization within their training to emphasize certain combat techniques and historical styles. There are 9 monastic traditions available at level 3. I'm going to go through them in alphabetical order, but if you want to skip ahead to a subclass you want to know more about, you can use the timestamps in the description to skip ahead to the one that you're interested in. The Astral Self monk shuns their physical form, believing Ki to be their true essence. Monks of this tradition focus on harnessing their true self in service of some mighty power or to defend the defenseless. Taking this tradition grants the monk Arms of the Astral Self, which allows them to use a bonus action to spend a key point and summon the arms of their true spiritual form, damaging nearby foes. These arms hover for 10 minutes unless the monk is incapacitated or killed, and grants buffs like using their wisdom modifier in place of strength checks and saving throws, and using the spectral arms to make unarmed strikes with greater reach, which use the monk's wisdom modifier for attack and damage rolls, and also deal force damage when they hit. Further levels in this subclass grant the Visage and Body of the Astral Self, which grants further buffs like seeing through darkness and deflecting elemental damage, and eventually the monk unlocks the Awakened Astral Self, which grants a +2 to armor class and a 3rd extra attack if the first 2 attacks are made with the Arms of the Astral Self. Ultimately, the Way of the Astral Self helps the monk become less multiple ability dependent, in that using the forms granted lets the monk focus on wisdom instead of strength or dexterity. While granting more damage, the pure creative opportunities a monk player can have with this subclass's abilities means the sky's the limit for how a crafty player can utilize this subclass in-game. The Drunken Master emphasizes unpredictability in combat, focusing on frustrating their foes with a demeanor of drunken stupor meant to conceal their very diligent techniques of blocking and striking foes. The Drunken Master is as much a performer as they are a martial artist. This is apparent immediately, because when taking this subclass, the monk gains proficiency in performance and brewer's supplies, as well as the Drunken technique, which states whenever the Drunken Master uses Flurry of Blows, they gain the benefit of the Disengage action and have their movement speed increased by 10 feet until the end of that turn. Further levels in this subclass let the monk get up from prone easier, redirect enemy melee attacks that miss to strike others within range, use ki to cancel disadvantage on rolls, and eventually modify Flurry of Blows to add more attacks within each flurry, so long as each attack targets a different creature. The Drunken Master monk is at their best in the middle of the fight, using ki to strike multiple enemies at a time and redirecting their attacks back at other enemies. They can jump into a horde of weaker enemies or take down multiple backline enemies in one turn by using their ki efficiently and effectively. Monks of the Way of Four Elements dedicate themselves to harnessing the elements around them as an extension of themselves. What this means in gameplay is that the monk gains the ability to cast elemental spells and effects through ki to devastating effect on the battlefield. Taking this subclass grants the monk 2 elemental disciplines, with 3 more being gained at higher levels. Some of these disciplines are restricted to level requirements, but many allow the monk to cast spells as listed in that discipline with no material requirement, but a hefty ki requirement instead. The monk is limited with how many ki points they can spend on casting though, starting with 3 points for casting at levels 5 through 8, and increasing up to 6 points for casting at levels 17 and beyond. These disciplines can range from snuffing out lights within 30 feet of the monk and turning water to ice, to casting powerful spells like Shatter, Fireball, and Cone of Cold. The Way of the Four Elements is the caster variant of the monk subclasses, but the sheer variety of disciplines available lets the monk truly tailor their abilities to fit the party and encounters that they might run into. The one downside is that it doesn't buff the monk's melee properties as much as the other subclasses, but who needs to punch things when you can cast Fireball? If the party needs a good backup caster for utility or damage, the Four Elements monk fills that role very well. The Kensei monk trains with weapons so heavily that they become an extension of their body, being as fluid with a sword as a calligrapher with a pen. This training requires them to be very intense in their devotion and study, with little room for interests other than their weaponry. When taking this subclass, the monk chooses one melee and ranged weapon to be Kensei weapons, so long as they don't have the heavy or special weapon properties. Gaining a Kensei weapon grants proficiency with that weapon and makes them monk weapons as well. Kensei weapons have a range of abilities the monk can utilize, some immediately and others as they continue to level up. Some abilities include using the weapon to add +2 to the monk's armor class after making an unarmed strike, adding extra damage to attacks, imbuing Kensei weapons with ki to have better attack and damage modifiers, and the ability to re-roll missed attacks with Kensei weapons. The Way of the Kensei monk is what happens when the DM tells the fighter main they can't play a fighter in the next campaign and have to play a different class. This subclass grants all the flexibility monks and fighters have when it comes to weaponry, and gives a lot of good abilities to both ranged and melee weapons in order to turn a fight around, making them useful in either melee or ranged damage rolls within the party. The Way of Mercy utilizes ki to manipulate the life force of others, ending someone's pain through healing or more macabre means. While some might associate them with alchemists or doctors, Way of Mercy monks conceal their faces with deep cowls and masks to remain faceless bringers of both life and death to those in need of their services. When taking this subclass, the monk is granted proficiency in Insight, Medicine, and the Herbalism kit. They also choose an appearance for their mask and gain the ability to spend ki to either restore hit points to an ally or inflict extra necrotic damage to an enemy. Further levels in this subclass grant the monk the ability to heal away debilitating conditions, inflict poison on enemies, buff the abilities to heal or deal necrotic damage during Flurry of Blows, and eventually let the monk use ki to resurrect a creature that died within the last 24 hours once per long rest. At first glance, someone could easily write off the Way of Mercy monk as just the default healer subclass, but that's not the entire truth. This monastic tradition grants the monk not only ways to heal allies, but also many ways to deal extra damage to enemies, creating situations where the monk will need to manage their ki wisely to balance damage dealing and healing allies who go down in combat. Monks of the Way of Long Death are obsessed with understanding how death works, and use that meaning to fuel their deadly martial techniques. When taking this subclass, the monk gains temporary hit points anytime they reduce an enemy to 0 hit points. Further levels in this subclass grant the ability to terrify enemies within 30 feet, the ability to use a key point to stay at 1 hit point if damage would normally reduce them to 0, and eventually the ability to channel ki to deal 2d6 necrotic damage per key point spent. The Way of Long Death is a great damage dealing subclass that grants the monk immediate bonuses to their survivability through temporary hit points, while accenting the amount of damage they do at higher levels with more abilities. If you want a monk that specializes in knocking down squishy enemies and dealing massive damage around the battlefield, the Way of the Long Death might just be for you. The Way of the Open Hand, as the name suggests, doubles down on the monk's punching power. Through different martial arts techniques, the Open Hand monk manipulates ki to control enemies on the battlefield. When taking this subclass, the monk can impose one of 3 additional effects on an enemy whenever they use Flurry of Blows. They can force the enemy to make a dexterity saving throw, falling prone if they fail, force the enemy to make a strength saving throw, or be pushed up to 15 feet away if they fail, and take away the enemy's ability to use reactions until the end of the monk's next turn. Further levels grant the monk the ability to heal themselves, meditate to grant themselves the effect of the Sanctuary spell, and eventually gain control over the vibrations within a creature's body to force a Constitution saving throw, dealing massive damage on a save or instantly killing the creature on a fail. While the Way of the Open Hand isn't the weakest subclass available, the main saving grace of it is the level 17 Quivering Palm insta-kill ability. Since most players won't reach this tier of gameplay in normal home games, the other abilities really don't add enough unique changes to the monk's style of play and feels rather bland when compared to the other options available. Because of this, I would not recommend playing this subclass, but it's not the worst choice out there for monks. Monks of the Way of Shadow focus on stealth, operating more like rogues or ninjas than traditional monks. Sworn to secrecy with regards to their missions and teachings, they stick to the darkness to conceal their dangerous prowess. When taking this subclass, the monk gains the ability to use their ki to duplicate the spells Darkness, Dark Vision, Pass Without Trace, and Silence. They also gain the Minor Illusion cantrip. Further levels in this subclass grant the Shadow Monk the ability to teleport up to 60 feet when in darkness or dim light, become invisible in dim light and darkness as an action, and gets a special reaction to strike enemies when they are hit by another creature within 5 feet of the monk. If the Way of the Open Hand isn't the worst subclass available for monks, the Way of Shadows certainly is. This subclass is very theme or setting dependent, simply because it relies heavily on being around or creating areas of darkness to use in combat. While the subclass does grant good utility for sneaking moments, it doesn't do enough to buff the Shadow Monk's attacks from the shadows to make them helpful in a wider array of scenarios for the party. Monks of the Way of the Sun Soul channel their ki into pure bolts of light, using meditation to unleash the light of any living soul they run into. When taking this subclass, the monk gains a special ranged attack to throw a bolt of light at enemies up to 30 feet away. When they do so, they can also spend a ki point to make a bonus action Sunbolt attack as well. Further levels in this subclass grant the ability to use ki to cast the Burning Hands spell, the ability to throw an explosive light orb up to 150 feet away that deals radiant damage, and the ability to grant a sun shield that emits light and can reflect damage back onto attackers who hit the monk while the shield is active. The Sun Soul Monk is a beast at laying out large area effects to damage multiple enemies with the power of light. The fact that these abilities can utilize more ki to increase their power, thus scaling them as the monk levels up, makes sure that the Sun Soul Monk continues to stay relevant at higher tiers of play, but still remains as fragile as any other monk until around level 17. As such, the Sun Soul is a great choice for a glass cannon area of effect damage dealer with both melee and ranged options. With all the class and subclass abilities laid out, let's go through some tips on how to build a monk if you'd like to try one for yourself. With monks being as versatile as they are, we can really tailor our monk to fit what we want them to do, or to fit what the party still needs. For this example, I'll just build a standard level 1 monk that focuses on dealing melee damage to backline enemies. When it comes to ability scores, the monk focuses on dexterity being their highest ability score to maximize damage with unarmed strikes and monk weapons, as well as boosting their unarmored defense. This is followed up by wisdom, which also increases unarmored defense as well as some of the monk's key abilities from certain subclasses. From here, we begin to delve into multiple ability dependence, because the monk would greatly benefit from having a high constitution score as well, but the other ability scores will need to be spread out as you see fit, based on what you have available. To determine my starting health, I would simply take 8 and then add my constitution modifier to it. Equipment choices for monks are fairly simple as well, due to their emphasis on using bare fists and little to no armor. For my character, I'll go with some basic equipment options like a short sword, a good basic monk weapon, the Dungeoneer's Pack, which grants me some useful adventuring equipment, and 10 darts, a simple thrown weapon that gives me a ranged option. With equipment sorted, let's dive into the abilities unlocked at level 1 next. When taking this class, every monk starts with the unarmored defense and martial arts abilities. When marking down unarmored defense, remember that for monks it's 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your wisdom modifier, and adjust your armor class accordingly as these stats increase when you receive ability score increases. Martial arts, on the other hand, is more of a passive setup ability than a real class feature, but there are some important things you will want to keep track of. Firstly, mark down that you're using your dexterity modifier for unarmed strikes and monk weapons, and that their damage can be replaced by 1d4. When starting, you probably won't want to replace your weapon's damage die with the d4 since it will be worse than your weapon's actual damage die. But remember that this is based on your martial arts die, which gets more powerful as you continue to level up. Your unarmed strikes will definitely want to be using the martial arts die for damage, however, as without that, you would only be doing 1 plus your strength modifier in unarmed strike damage. Secondly, I would mark down the bonus action unarmed strikes I can make as a monk so long as my attack action is with an unarmed strike or monk weapon. This is very important to remember, as many players forget that they have bonus actions this early. These extra strikes at early levels can give you the damage you need to fully down an enemy before ending your turn, saving you and your party members some healing later. And with that, we have a level 1 monk ready to go. Well, everybody, that is everything you need to know about the monk class in D&D 5th edition. A versatile melee class that can plug a wide variety of gaps in the adventuring party, the monk is definitely a great choice if you want to do laps around everybody else on the battlefield before punching a monster so hard that it dies before the rest of the party can say ki. In terms of aesthetic, I've only ever really appreciated the monk for its roleplay and backstory lore, but after reviewing this, I think I might reserve a backup character to serve as a flexible role filler for my next game. But unfortunately, this breakdown isn't all about me. What do you all think of the monk? Do you like the mobility and damage they bring to the table, or are they simply too fragile to work for you? Let me know in the comments below, or join us over on the Altrole Discord, which is linked in the description, to discuss it with the community. While you're there, feel free to say hi and check out our live courses that we run every week for free that cover any and everything you could possibly need to know to play D&D. If you want to help support the server and this channel, you can check out our Ko-fi page in the description as well. Lastly, if you found this breakdown helpful, feel free to share it with a friend to help them learn more about D&D and help us reach more new players to get them into D&D. But that is everything I had for you today. Now, our last poll on the server determined that the next breakdown is going to be on the Paladin class, so if you want to find out why everyone's so smitten with the Smiter class, we plan on releasing that video next week. We're also releasing the next poll on which class you all would like broken down, so if you really want to see a specific class explained in this style, head on over to the Discord and cast your vote while the poll is still up. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate all of you supporting us here, and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see all of you next time.